Thank you very much. So you've had a wealth of information today, and what we're going to provide now is some rich data that we gained from a local study that we have done here in Nottingham. And this is where we've explored the role of BAC-IN and how they have supported BAME people with their journeys of addiction and recovery. So as Oliver pointed out earlier, this is a learning partnership between Sheffield Hallam University, Lankelly Chase and BAC-IN. I have with me here today my co-presenter, Jag Singh.
Hi everybody, I'm Jag Singh and I'm a recovering addict and I'm also here with BAC-IN.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Not working.
It's not working. Oh. Okay, right, let's go back. Super. Okay, so the content of today's presentation will include the research aims. I'll then move on to outline the methods. I'll go into some depth over the findings, touch upon the outcomes, and then we will finish with the key learning. So the research aims were to test how well BAC-IN's model for addiction and recovery works in meeting the needs of BAME service users, so that's Black, Asian and minority ethnic people. We wanted to better understand their recovery pathway, reaching right back into their pasts and seeing how their pasts impact on their present experiences, and also exploring the impact of cultural identity and multiple disadvantage on their lives. It was very important to us right from the beginning that we amplify the voices of BAME people with addiction, a group that are seldom heard in research and in society more generally. So in terms of the methods, we conducted longitudinal research, and this is basically research that involves repeat interviews every 6 to 7 weeks over a period of 6 to 7 months. As a result, we created 10 in-depth case studies, and the principles that underlined our research were those of co-production. So Sheffield Hallam University worked very closely with BAC-IN employees to train them up in qualitative research skills so that they too produce some of the case studies. They actually produced 6 of the case studies. The data were validated by Sheffield Hallam University. The following themes were explored with the 10 service users. We found out more about their background and their experiences, the services that they had accessed for addiction and recovery, and their experiences of the BAC-IN service. Wherever possible, quotes have been used in the reports that you all have in your conference packs, but we've also used quotes in the presentation today, and this is because we want to amplify the voices. And Jag is actually going to bring those people to life because he's actually going to read out those quotes. Okay, I should point out before we continue that the aim of this work is to avoid pathologizing or problematizing culture. This is simply based on the experiences of 10 individuals, and therefore our findings cannot be generalized. We recognize that culture actually plays a central role in forming individual identities. This complex table that you can see here is actually in the report. But very quickly, what it shows us is that we have predominantly males taking part in this research. So we had 9 men and 1 female. This was done on ethical grounds, and we were only able to speak to those who had made adequate progress in their recovery. You can see in terms of age ranges, we spoke to individuals between the ages of sort of late 20s, early to mid 30s, and early to mid 40s. You can see the areas that they came from and the various ethnicities. Of note here, 3 individuals had been diagnosed with mental ill health before the onset of their addiction. So what did we find? Now, the narratives of addiction reveal a number of reasons behind addiction, and a prominent one was trauma. 2 individuals took drugs recreationally, but the onset of their addiction was attributed to their existing mental ill health, coupled with the trauma of losing family members. Daniel's drug use started in his early teens after his friend died. He recalled,
I lost one of my good friends when I was young. He died of cancer, and he was in pain constantly when he died. I struggled with it. When he died, his dad knocked on the door and was just like, he died. I remember thinking, what? I've never felt like that before. I tried to basically prove that I could hurt myself more than anyone else ever could. And I think that's where it stemmed from.
Daniel's addiction was also attributed to being bullied at school. Trauma was also triggered by life-changing incidents such as sexual abuse. The chaotic life experiences of two service users led to addiction. One lived with an alcoholic parent and felt neglected. The other grew up on prescription drugs, which had severe side effects. He experienced a very unhappy school life, which was riddled with racism and multiple exclusions, and this led to severe depression. It was a relationship breakdown later on in life that led to addiction. The desire to be accepted by peers and to fit in a mainly white school drove one individual to take drugs, and this escalated into addiction. 3 others explained that peer pressure had led them to taking drugs socially, which had spiraled out of control, and then they began to take harder drugs and became addicted. Now, cultural norms emerged as a notable finding in a couple of accounts. Colvinder observed that alcohol consumption is prohibited in Sikhism, but culturally over time it had become acceptable within Punjabi Indian communities to drink, for example, at weddings. But for some, the social acceptance allowed alcohol to become a part of their routine lives. Stephen reiterated that alcohol had been a part of his culture and a constant in his life since childhood, so his father, his grandfather and uncle were all heavy drinkers. Now, these insights help us to provide some understanding of why certain excesses that lead to addiction might be overlooked over others and not be problematized due to being normalized. Racism marred the lives of half, so that's 5 of the individuals that we interviewed. It impacted negatively on their pasts and their present experiences because for some it continues to feature in their lives. It's been the cause of frustration, feelings of not belonging, and a lack of trust in the workplace, in education, and of significance, a lack of trust in encounters with service providers. Carl explained how racism during childhood through to adulthood had tarnished his life.
There's racism, as in, I'm black. I'm big, so people will instantly, you ain't going nowhere. It's a mentality, something I deal with on a daily basis.
Now, in the present, evidence suggests that Carl is subjected to indirect racism at work. His narrative reveals continuous tensions and power struggles with colleagues. Edward recalled being taunted because of the colour of his skin. Of dual heritage, he desperately sought to be accepted by the West Indian community, but he experienced significant rejection. He experienced racism from both sides, from white and black communities. He wanted to understand where he fitted, and this led to a lot of confusion and challenges, and drugs provided him a way of escaping from the reality that he was dealing with. It gave him a temporary sense of fitting in. Edward explained,
Part of me is of West Indian descent, and I wanted to know what that was about. What did it feel like? It has an effect as far as my addiction's concerned. Yeah, you know, it's confusing, man. You don't know who you are, you don't know what's what, and ultimately, you take the drug and you fit in with anybody. As soon as I discovered drugs, I did no longer have to face the realities of what was.
Now, employment was important to several individuals that we spoke to. They felt that it provided them with a sense of purpose and a distraction from addiction. But we found that those who were actually in employment were in quite precarious situations. So, for example, they were on 0-hour contracts or in informal work. and therefore involved in irregular hours. Carl seemed trapped in a vicious circle. He had a lot of time and energy and a lot of enthusiasm, but very little of use to do. His tension with employers had led to him being called into work less and less, and as a result of this, his financial situation had begun to deteriorate. So what did addiction lead to? When in active addiction, individuals engaged in behaviours that led to multiple problems, not only for themselves, but for others around them. Stephen described how his addiction had spiralled out of control, leading to antisocial behaviour and violence.
Age 21, 22, all the way up to now, with a domino effect. Then I started drinking, then I started smoking copious amounts of marijuana, at least 2 ounces a week. I was snorting cocaine. I was always on the street. I was involved in anything I could be involved in, whether it be violence, hanging around with a round crowd, to make myself feel good.
3 individuals had repeat prison sentences. They were either drug dealing or feeding their growing addiction through robbing, aggressive behaviour, or violence, and all of this led to more and more contact with the police, prison, and probation services. 3 individuals experienced homelessness in cases where family members could no longer cope or tolerate the impact of addiction on their lives. Now, the significant efforts of family members to provide individuals with support was evident in most of the accounts. However, the gaps in family members' knowledge and understanding of addiction and recovery led to individuals receiving inadequate support. Masood's case revealed the misplaced good intentions of his family. Their solution for his recovery was to send him back to Bangladesh, where cannabis was readily available and he used more. Masood talks about the concept of family honour and how it manifests itself in the day-to-day lives of South Asian people in particular. He explained how actions and behaviours impact on honour, leading to shame and stigma. Masood relayed that his family had got a lot of shame. Masood's narrative about support powerfully conveyed how family honour acted as a barrier to him accessing appropriate support for addiction.
With BAME community, there isn't any. So you can either go to your doctors, you can go to a volunteer organisation supporting people with substance misuse issues, where you're going to get brushed off. You can go to your local community and you're going to be tarnished, shunned. Your family is going to be ashamed. People are going to think you're all druggies. You yourself are bringing down your full family. So I could have gone to the mosque, to the imam, and said, I'm on drugs, and he would have brushed me off. I didn't think there was anything available for anybody in the BAME community because it's very frowned upon. Nobody knows if you're an addict. It's going to be hidden.
Kulvinder and Stephen reiterated that shame and stigma associated with substance misuse in the Indian community also led to problems being hidden and therefore not being addressed. When asked about formal support, Stephen explained that he was referred to a mainstream service for addiction recovery in Nottingham, but he didn't feel adequately supported there. He was only given the opportunity to offload feelings. He recounted,
it's an appointment. You sit down and talk to somebody for about 15 to 20 minutes, or as long as you need. Write on their piece of paper and say, okay, same time next week. That's it. No understanding, no constructive message for me, we could do this, we could do that. I was just a number.
Several others claimed that they too had felt like they were just a number. It's worth noting that a number of individuals with dual diagnosis also received help for their mental ill health and continue to do so. Patrick was supported by the dual diagnosis team, and whilst he acknowledged their help, he felt he needed more support with his addiction. Carl, for example, received support from a psychotherapist and a community psychiatric nurse, but he expressed frustration that both of them failed to understand addiction because they lacked lived experience, and their understandings of addiction were essentially drawn from textbooks. Almost everyone had experienced had some experience of attending Narcotics Anonymous meetings and Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. A range of feelings were revealed about these meetings, both positive and negative. These meetings served to remind individuals of their addiction, but also provided continuity of support in the evenings and at weekends. But Stacey said that she went to a couple of meetings and felt that she couldn't relate to anyone there because they were older, they were white, and many of them had been abstinent for many years. The AA meetings were ineffective for Stephen. He didn't fit in. He commented, "They are made for white people. When I walk in there, I'm made to feel not welcome." However, his experience of NA meetings was positive. He emphasised that the advantage of the NA meetings was that the smaller group size allowed everyone the opportunity to speak for a bit longer. BAC-IN was identified as being the main source of support for all 10 service users whose journeys were tracked. So what support do BAC-IN provide? Accounts revealed that BAC-IN provide one-to-one support very quickly after the initial assessment. A therapeutic and confidential space was provided for individuals to address personal or psychological concerns related to addiction, relationships, confidence and self-esteem, and mental ill health. Evidently, BAC-IN attempt to meet the holistic needs of individuals. So we had people talking about receiving support with job search, compiling CVs, interview preparation techniques. Others were supported to secure accommodation, help with debt management, and to access welfare support. In line with their holistic approach, BAC-IN worked closely with family members to increase their understanding of addiction and support. Masood relayed the benefits of this approach.
Coming to BAC-IN has helped my family understand what addiction is. They've openly and actively reached out to my family, spoke to my family, which has opened their eyes a lot more to what I'm going through.
Now, the recovery group meetings were accessed by all the individuals that we spoke to, and usually on a weekly basis. This arena encouraged openness, sharing of experiences, and mutual support. The ability to relate to one another was a major draw of this group. When individuals shared their challenges and achievements, others experiencing similar journeys benefited in realizing that they were not alone in their experiences. Feelings of belonging were expressed by several individuals, and the realization of addiction for those in denial resulted from hearing others' stories in the group session. A sense of responsibility to fellow recovery group members underpinned the approach to providing and receiving support. The recovery group sessions opened up communication and encouraged those present to find solutions from within the group. For example, Kolvinder shared that he recalled receiving guidance on what to do when he was struggling with his cravings. The peer-to-peer WhatsApp group was described as providing a platform to share information and to offer encouragement out of hours, particularly during evenings and weekends when access to other forms of support was limited. Dean reported using the WhatsApp group a lot, especially during particular periods of vulnerability.
There may be a time you're feeling really weak and you think, you know what, I'm just going to have a look back on my WhatsApp because there's things there on there that I remember on there because it can help. I've been very, very close to relapsing and WhatsApp saved me.
So here the opportunity to look back to previous messages was deemed helpful. Kolvinder's account revealed that BAC-IN had fostered interdependency, so not dependency but interdependency between the group members to provide mutual support through supportive messages, posting calming music and positive affirmations. When asked about their experiences of other services for addiction and recovery, inevitably all 10 individuals drew comparisons between those services and BAC-IN to demonstrate the marked differences. Several of them drew attention to the significance of BAC-IN's lived experience of addiction and how this had contributed to their in-depth understanding of addiction and recovery. This knowledge was seen as setting them apart from other services.
The people who I was speaking to through the NHS, they were just people who have studied it. They haven't really gone through it. And I think that slight disconnect between the two has made this place BAC-IN more appealing. It doesn't matter what I say or how I say it, they know straight away what I mean. When I'm speaking to the other person from other services, they were like, okay, that's fine, but they didn't get it. So if they don't get it, I don't see the point.
With total abstinence perceived as fundamental to recovery, BAC-IN were felt to have the interests of those with addiction at heart, whereas mainstream services and their approaches of writing prescriptions to get people off drugs were felt to be ineffective and disingenuous. The desire to remove any type of drug dependency emerged as a strong theme from several interviews. The friendly and welcoming nature of BAC-IN was highlighted by several individuals as being markedly different from their experiences of other services' access for support.
Other services, you're sitting there queuing and no one's come out and said hello. You go to the receptionist and you've got to queue. BAC-IN offers more. It's done in a sincere way. It's a massive difference. It's not a case of we'll see you then.
Responsiveness. So from the initial assessment, BAC-IN put support into place quickly. When Stephen reached out to BAC-IN, he was seen within the hour. In Masood's experience, the quick and easy appointment system at BAC-IN was different to mainstream services. He recollected leaving messages at the offices of a service and would hear back from them after a few days. Further, he didn't get the support when he needed it most because it was out of hours.
I won't be able to call them because the reception hours are only open till 1 p.m. What I was feeling was at 9 p.m. And I got in touch with BAC-IN, and they carried on texting me till 10:30 p.m. I wouldn't have got that anywhere else. I can't call the GP. I can't call anybody else.
Kulvinder also took reassurance in knowing that he had access to round-the-clock support from BAC-IN should he need it. Now, religion and/or spirituality played a fundamental role in most service users' recovery. It acted as a source of support and a positive force. Stephen shared that spirituality helped him to maintain a positive outlook on life. There was lots of evidence in the accounts of using meditation, exercise, listening to positive music, watching positive spiritual videos, all to help recovery. Kulvinder reiterated the benefits.
I'm not as agitated as I used to be. I'm more relaxed. I've started to meditate more, which is helping me a lot.
Rajan revealed that his faith helped him to cope and move forward in his day-to-day recovery, particularly in helping him to keep a check on his behaviour. Similarly, Kulvinder reported that spirituality helped police his thoughts, which in the past had led him astray.
I've been meditating a lot more. I've been listening to quite a lot of mantras when I go to sleep. It's almost like I've got thought police in my mind now.
Crucially, BAC-IN not only understand the role of religion and/or spirituality in many BAME people's lives, they actually spread the benefits of religion and spirituality for hope and strength during recovery. Of note, those without religious or spiritual disposition are respected and supported without any pressure to conform. Of all the factors that drew individuals to BAC-IN, identification with service providers and users was of most significance. Identification occurred on a number of different levels, but to understand addiction, it was felt important for service providers to have experienced addiction.
I know that the best help you can get is from another addict, someone who's been there, and that's a fact.
Knowing that people with addiction had transformed their lives was motivational and inspiring. This was highlighted in Daniel's account.
So yeah, you need BAC-IN and a peer group and friends, people who've been through it. And I've been out the other side, otherwise you don't get nowhere.
The ability to identify with BAC-IN staff and service users on the basis of ethnicity and cultural similarities contributed to a feeling of belonging for Dean, Stacey and Rajan. Masood, who had expressed frustration in his interviews about the lack of cultural understanding amongst service providers, felt that at BAC-IN he could express himself freely without the need to explain when talking about his culture, practices and issues of stigma and shame.
Caucasian people don't have an understanding of what's happening in my home, whereas I can say it at BAC-IN as they understand and share the humanity, the hierarchy and the honour.
Okay. Now, in terms of outcomes, we recognise that recovery is a lifelong journey. But what we did see was that for those whose journeys we tracked over the 6 to 7 months, the recovery was sustained over a considerable period of time, and actually they only experienced minor relapses that didn't escalate. They didn't escalate because BAC-IN stepped in very quickly. There was evidence of that in the accounts and prevented the problems from growing. For those who were struggling with alcohol addiction, there was evidence in a few accounts that individuals were either drinking less. So Patrick, for example, was drinking half the amount each day and half the strength, and others had stopped drinking altogether. For those who felt it was important to secure employment because they needed a sense of purpose and a distraction from addiction, they were supported by BAC-IN to gain employment. So the key learning is that in terms of experiences of addiction, they are rooted in cultural explanations, and therefore they require culturally informed responses to addiction. We've learned that shame and stigma plays a significant part in people's experiences of addiction and how they are treated for addiction. And we've also learned today that racism from the past and present has informed individuals' experiences. And this has led to a lack of trust, particularly in light of this work in service providers. Experiences of mainstream services reveal a lack of diversity and cultural knowledge amongst mainstream service providers. And this has been a cause of frustration. And actually what it's done is it has moved people away from those services, and they have shown less and less interest in engaging at all. Would you like to do that?
BAC-IN offer holistic support in-house in identifying that other factors such as security of housing are interrelated to recovery and important for stability. BAC-IN's recognition of the immediacy of need for support by addicts and responsiveness sets them apart from other mainstream services which are reported not operating out of hours and putting people with addiction on waiting lists. Identification between BAC-IN peers in terms of lived reality of addiction, culture, ethnicity, etc., and service users is key to creating trust and encouraging disclosure and subsequently the uptake of support. In recognizing that belief provides people with hope, including those with addiction, BAC-IN encourage those who draw strength from religion and or spirituality to connect with these sources of support. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jack.